Where are we going? Welcome to this exclusive podcast produced by Spirit Watch Ministries that will show where life in our darkening times is now turning and how you can avoid the detours of deception through the hope of biblical truth. The Lord Jesus in Matthew 24 warned us over 2 millennia ago and how urgently we need to heed him now. Our host is Pastor Rafael Martinez, a seasoned Northwest Indiana-based minister, intercessor, and counter-cult apologist who will help you discern the journey of change we're all on as the last day of the last days now winds down. For more information, check out our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. Now, here's Pastor Rafael.
Once again, thank you for surfing in to Where Are We Going, the weekly Spirit Watch Ministries podcast that we do. And once again, this is Pastor Rafael here at the microphone here, and I also have a very special guest with us today who's going to be sharing with us a little more about her story and her journey out through the wilderness of what we now call, or what we now know as, the Xenos/Dwell movement in Columbus, Ohio, which is starting to finally get long overdue attention on its doings. And we have a young woman by the name of Jessica, and we're going to be having her share with us today. And Jessica, it's a pleasure to meet you and finally have you here on a podcast today. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm grateful for your podcast here and the work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to discussing all with you today.
Great. Fantastic. Well, tell us a little more about yourself. How long were you involved with Xenos, and how did you get involved, and just a little bit about where you're at right now and what you're doing, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Okay. So I was born into Xenos in 87. And my first memories of Xenos, were back in the warehouse days, running across the parking lot from building to building. I went to the Xenos schooling at Calumet Christian School, from preschool, kindergarten, and first grade. And I just really kind of grew up in the church. I got super involved in junior high. And I was until the last time I was in the building, was in 2007. So, I was in for, about 20 years of my life. And I'll just say that, when I became super involved in junior high, my experience was that I ended up becoming, the first time I ever started teaching at the larger meetings was in 7th grade. I started leading, a bush group, what they call a bush group after school. It's an after school group, that would meet at my house in 8th grade. And so I was involved in their leadership team. I started taking their leadership training courses, which is called LTC. And I was also taking seminary classes at night through a Messianic temple. And
wow. So really getting involved there in their extracurricular activity there. And so is that something that generally would seem to be the goal for people in Xenos? I mean, for them to have their children pursue that kind of path?
Yes. Xenos is very focused on, they call themselves a replicating church. And their goal is to replicate. Dennis is well known for saying in teachings that if you want to find a family-friendly church, go find one. There's a million of them. But here in this church, we replicate. We're a replicating church. And so the goal within Xenos is to consistently bring up leaders and then replicate other leaders so that you can grow the church.
Wow.
That is the focus.
Wow.
And I just wanted to kind of bring those things up because I think that there's a party line that kind of gets spun by them when people speak out, that people are that these are just kind of fringe people, or that they were dealing with, lower level, maybe spiritually immature people, that they were hurt by. And, in my experience, that is not the case. The people that I know who have left have dealt with upper leadership. And so I think that this narrative that people haven't been that involved or don't really know how, the Xenos culture works is just intentionally dishonest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's certainly what it has seemed in the time that we've been interacting with other survivors, and just by reading and studying some of the things that Xenos has produced over the past almost 50 years it's been around. It just seems that, like you said, they definitely have a mission. All right, it's definitely one focused upon a perpetuation of the organization at the expense of the organism within. It sounds to me like people are just really means to an end. And then maybe that's been, I think, in our discussion before we got here, that certainly sounds like that was part of a lot of your initial struggles in terms of trying to reconcile what you saw with what you heard and what you were taught.
Right. Exactly.
So, what else did you see? I mean, as you grew up, obviously as someone very, very involved, very, very immersed in the entire culture. Matter of fact, I think there's a term called Xenos babies. That seems to be quite.
Yes.
I hear people are basically generational, with probably 2 or 3 generations on. What does a Xenos baby look forward to seeing? Okay, from the time your parents obviously felt they were doing the right thing and were trying very hard, I guess, in their own way to bring to you what they felt was the best way that you could live. And every parent of certainly, I know Xenos certainly feels that way. There's no faulting in any of that. But what does a Xenos baby typically expect to be received by as they grow up? What sort of influences? What sort of teaching? What sort of what kind of direction does the curricula and all that you do really kind of point them towards?
So in your elementary years, you're going to go through Oasis, and that's more of like a typical what other people in other churches kind of curriculum,
right?
More of like a Sunday school type of thing. Once you hit junior high, that's when things start to really turn up.
Okay.
You're gonna join a cell group or a home church, which is it's a small group that'll meet on one night, and then you're going to be expected to go to the larger group, they call them CTs, Central Teachings, and then the more involved that you become as you become leaders or student leaders, etc., you're going to start being discipled by someone older than you. And so you're going to meet with them one night. You're going to, maybe join the leadership team, which will meet occasionally. You're going to be going to prayer groups. And these are, so your week starts to become very stacked, where you're spending a lot of time with Xenos. And so what I think that they have a real danger of is that then it becomes this kind of echo chamber. You don't have time to really do much other than Xenos work. And there's a lot of emphasis on being that Xenos is doing is where God has blessed Columbus. You will start to see lots of pressure to evangelize, to grow the group. And then specifically, you're also there. They're like Tom Dixon, who was an elder, and he was over student ministries, and Joe Body, who was over student ministries. They have papers and teachings where they explain that beginning in junior high that they're starting to communicate to young, middle schoolers through the high school, that the most important thing is to build your eternal rewards. And so some of that is going to look like making Xenos the priority and your ministry in Xenos the priority. Specifically, they will tell you that we shouldn't be, that if your extracurriculars or your grades are getting in the way of your ministry and your work at Xenos, then those things are the ones that should be sacrificed. So do you really need to pursue an A in this class, or could you just get by with a C because you need more time to evangelize and be out at meetings, etc.?
Wow.
That is in their doctrine, and that's starting very young. And then beginning in 7th grade, you start to see they have curriculum that's on their website right now where they discuss God's view of sex for girls and God's view of sex for boys. They're 4-week curriculums, and you can see a real difference when you look at the boys versus the girls, where girls are told, don't be a stupid girl. A guy wants to respect you, but if you let him do anything, he's not going to. They start to speak about how boys view girls as sexual objects. And they essentially kind of put all of the blame on girls if a boy were to lust. And then in the boys' curriculum, it says, don't worry, lust is normal. Everybody has problems with it, and God wants to give you a hot wife. There's just this very different tone in the way that people are being taught, and it starts very young.
Yeah. Wow. That's unbelievable. Yeah. Well, that sounds about par for the course. So they were perpetuating very specific gender role stereotypes as well as a worldview surrounding them, from a very early age. I mean, when did you first, what can you remember first hearing that was the sort of thing that there was a specific way they wanted you to live? Can you remember how old you were?
It would have been 6th grade. So I would have been 11.
Man, incredible. Yep.
Yeah.
That's always the most formative time too. Yeah. And at that point, you're 6, 7 years old, that's already, by the time a child's 5 years old, their basic personality is established, but at that point on, a lot can change in that. And when you're just prior to puberty, starting to hear that really can become so terribly effective. So, was this something that, and of course, if this was an entirely top-down pressure, how were your parents teaching? Obviously they went along with it, and how did it affect how they raised you?
Interesting question. I think I don't know that my parents. We've discussed it actually now that I'm an adult. My parents, they joined as adults, right? And so they weren't aware of the curriculum that was being taught in specificity. And so I think that they saw that I was excited and very into and committed to the church, and they saw that as a good thing, because I loved God. But I don't think that they, understood the dynamics of the high control that's already being implemented, in that young age, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, because what I'm saying, if they joined as adults, like you said, they probably weren't as sensitized to that top-down mandate. Whereas if they, let's say they were Xenos babies, let's say they were raised up in that, I would imagine that they may have been more, apt to, or more inclined towards that kind of programming on you to make things even more rigid. So maybe that was a really kind of a mixed blessing there. So obviously this was something that, you felt was really good for you, and you really put your heart and soul into it. And you really were someone that I just, of course, as any young child would, and wanting to get ahead in the world and get ahead in understanding things, that you embrace it fully, and you become really zealous for that. So, what were some of the things that you saw that maybe didn't start adding up to you? I mean, at some point, everyone starts to see this. At what point did you start seeing some of the bumps in the road that just seemed a little bit out of step?
So I think that there were things that I noted that I was uncomfortable with, but it wasn't until I had, at this point, I had been very much a yes man. Yes, I will take on more. Yes, I will do more. Yes, I will lead here. Yes, I will teach here. Whatever you need from me, because I'm trusting my leadership, my adult leadership, that they have the best intentions for me. And until there was a personal issue that had happened in my life, where I was a victim of something, and the church got involved and they handled it very poorly. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time that I was like, whoa, I don't agree with the leadership decisions and the way this is being handled in the aftermath. And I addressed the issues. These were issues that I didn't want other people to know. So it wasn't that I was going around and spreading these things to other people. I was speaking directly with upper leadership. And I was told that the elders had made this decision on this, that the elders had spoken about me, and that I needed to get in line and drop it. I needed to agree that what they did was, how they were handling it was correct. And if I were to continue to say that what they did was wrong, that would be considered disloyal dissent. Now, I would have been like 14 years old at this time, and I was young, and it was a traumatic situation, and I should have been being comforted and supported. Instead, I was being told to focus on serving other people, serving the church, and ignore the suffering that I was feeling. And so once that happened, it took me a few months of this going back and forth, and I thought, I just genuinely don't agree with how this is handled. And so once that critical thinking skill kind of kicked on, I started to kind of view things a little bit differently.
Let me ask you about that. Let's just stop there for a minute, and let me ask you something about that. You had been, like you said, just a very, very assenting, very, very meek, very compliant young woman, young girl, following along with who you thought were God's, appointed teachers and influences in your life. And you ran across a situation that pushed you completely outside those boundaries. They put you completely beyond all of that. And for the first time, you began thinking for yourself. You began connecting your experiences and your own feelings with what was going on and what you were being presented. That was a big moment, and that's a big moment for anyone's life to come to. But when you came to that, you finally began feeling that what had happened was wrong. afterwards, what kind of doubts did you feel? Did you tend to feel like, well, maybe you were doubting, maybe you should have been more obedient, maybe you should have been more of this, more of that? What was that moment like? Can you reflect on that?
Yeah. I do think that I probably ran the gambit of emotions with that. That I think that in some ways that I almost kind of struggled with gaslighting myself that maybe my perception is wrong because I'm not agreeing with all of the leadership decisions blindly. That if I'm the only one who has a problem with this, that maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Even though I knew that I wasn't. So I'm struggling to kind of align that with my own experience. And I think I also really struggled to I felt kind of a sense of, I don't know, just disappointment or betrayal that, I'm trusting people in these leadership to really be pursuing God, and they aren't willing to listen to me.
Right.
And so how do I just trying to reconcile how I trust the leadership blindly again.
Right. And I appreciate you sharing that, because that's so important in understanding when you're confronted in abuse in a situation like that in Xenos or any other abusive movement, any other cultic movement. When a member is confronted with an outrage that really absolutely levels them and starts to getting the sink for themselves, there's always this overwhelming mix and storm of thought and emotions, because what they're doing is they're recovering basic autonomy, basic self-determination. They're trying to figure out how do I reconcile what I've just been confronted with how I want to live and how I feel I should be treated. And that's so huge in understanding how cults control people. I appreciate your sharing on that, because that's an important point. I think a lot of people are going to hearken to, because a lot of people are told just to trust and just trust the leaders. Completely ignore your own feelings. If you have any doubt, it's because you're struggling, because you have some sort of spiritual issue. When in essence, what you're doing is basically, recapturing authenticity in your life. You're seeing, you're being real, and the situation is not. It's you're being pushed into situations that you shouldn't be in. And a lot of people, I think, who are at the point of considering their involvement with groups like this or in situations like this, sometimes just need to hear that, need to understand that, look, you're not alone, okay? Just because you think for yourself doesn't mean that you've committed the second unforgivable sin. So thank you for sharing on that. You can continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was a great point. And I was hoping you could just maybe share a little more about what was some of the other, as I said, bumps in the road that began to rock your world there, so to speak.
Yeah. And just while I'm thinking of it, you mentioned autonomy. Dennis has a teaching that's still on the site that people can look up, where he talks about how autonomy is a form of rebellion against God, and he has that as a bullet point.
Wow.
And that we are required to submit to our spiritual leaders in the church, and so that I think that there's just this culture that, if you disagree with something, you can kindly bring it up, but if your leadership tells you no, you're still wrong, then your decision is either to get out of the church or submit. Those are the only two options.
Wow.
And then there's a ton of conversation about how our feelings lie, and that we need to trust and be anchored in truth. And so I think that is then misapplied in a lot of situations where you're saying, oh my gut, this doesn't feel right. And you're being told not to trust your own feelings, but to trust the truth of your leaders, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're doing the thinking for you. Your feelings don't matter.
Right.
That's a classic, as I mentioned before in our last podcast with Shauna. That's a classic sign of cultic mind control. It's called doctrine over person. It's part of what Dr. Lifton, Dr. Robert Lifton, who created these criteria years and years ago, mentioned as our 8 signs that this is what's going on, that there's actually thought reform or the pressure to transform your thinking. What it looks like, what doctrine over person basically says is that is exactly what you're describing, is that the doctrine and the dogma, the belief system, the commands, they are there to take precedence over whatever feelings you might have about it, or whatever cost it might wreak of you. It just means that what you say, what you feel is immaterial. It's not important. It's that the doctrine itself is flawless. The authority is divine. You can't question it. You've got to obey it without question. Right. And that's what I'm saying. It makes total sense. You can go ahead. I'm sorry. You just had a great point. You just had a great point. I just had to kind of highlight this. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. So once that happened, I kind of came to this decision that, I'm just saying, this was my own internal monologue at this point, where I said, I love the people that are in this church, and I do. I genuinely think that a lot of the people in the church, most of the people in the church, are doing what they think is best.
Sure. Absolutely. As in all cults, that's what they all are. Everyone is there with the best of intentions. Nobody goes out to just eat children or spray or throw blood on synagogues. They're there to live a good life. They're their very best to do that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I just kind of made this decision where maybe my role here is to stay and then be willing to kind of help maybe shape the culture in a more healthy way, or to because I still genuinely believe that the people were going to be willing at some point and open to constructive criticism down the line. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to stay committed, but I was now looking at situations with a more with more critical thinking. And I started to kind of just feel really uncomfortable with a lot of the methodical ways that are really ultimately manipulative in how they grow the church.
Yeah.
And you can see that in things like the weekly prayer groups in high school, or they do that a lot in the ministry house at like a house meeting, where what that isn't, you're not meaning to discuss like, hey, I've been struggling with this situation in my own personal life. The prayer meetings are specifically about evangelism. It's always geared towards how we're growing the church. Who are you bringing out? What are their names? And then somebody's writing that down, whether that's on a whiteboard or in notepads. And people are revealing information about the people that they're trying to reach out or bring into the church that is inappropriate and not, it's not edifying in any way. And so, for example, one example would be, someone was discussing how they were bringing out this girl, and she had been to I don't know, cell group one time or something. And how she had confided in her that her uncle used to molest her, and going on in details about this story and how clearly she was really gaining this person's trust, and she thinks that she's going to be able to get her to come out to church because she's the only person she'd ever confided this into. And I was just like, I remember sitting there like, you're violating her trust by sharing this with us.
Yeah. And was this something that happened a lot though? From what I understand, this is part of what you're telling me. You're not the first person to tell me that. Other people have said that in what are supposedly, quiet, safe spaces that for prayer, that instead people start talking about other people's failings and issues and how they can be used to kind of manipulate people into involvement with the group. Is that something that goes on, a lot?
Yes, this is routine. This is the culture. This is how every meeting is. Each conversation is going to look a little different, but this is what is expected in these meetings. And it's a culture, I think, too, that I don't even think that this, like in this specific situation, I don't think this girl had any idea that she was violating this person's trust. I think that her intent in sharing it was to be like, look at the efforts I've made and they're being effective, because there's this constant push that you need to be doing more. You need to be bringing out more people. You need to be taking on more projects. You need to be discipling more people. You need to be, there's just this, you can never just sit. Dennis calls it creating tension. There always needs to be tension in order for there to be spiritual growth. So you can never just exist within the body. You always have to be striving for more. And so I think what happens is there's this culture then of pressure, and people are oversharing because they want to provide some kind of tangible proof that they are really, investing and trying and working in that, whatever. But then what happens there is, so then that conversation then leads into, okay, well, you're going to bring her out next week. Let's do a teaching that, her biggest hang up is, how could God let bad things happen because she was molested? So now let's do a teaching on that so that we can most impact her and help the Holy Spirit reach her. And this type of thing happens all the time, where it's these manufactured, emotionally manipulative situations where people feel like they're coming out, they're being love bombed. People already know all of this information about them that they're not aware of. And so when people are speaking to them, it feels like, oh, we really connect. Or, oh, it's this manufactured relating that isn't authentic.
Right. Right. And that's another sign. Excuse me. Here's time out, but for Robert, just kudo for Dr. Lifton's work. That's another sign of cultic mind control. It's called mystical manipulation. It's when people are led into a situation, and whether it's seemingly spontaneous or a contrived part of programming in terms of an influence or experience, people are led in situations where they are just brought into some sort of contact with God's divinity, with the power of God, because they've just had some miraculous thing happen, some connection within them that helps them show that there's this divine power at work amongst them. When really, like you just said, it was just entirely contrived. It was completely programmed. It was completely intentionally set up. And people, like you said, in most situations, will get in there and see, oh man, maybe this is where I need to stay. Maybe God wants me to stay here because these people are just being so loving and caring for me. And again, that's part of the love bombing. It's all one big thing that really works it here. And that's, again, and I appreciate your patience with me discussing this point, because as we know, Xenos has an incredible amount of apology it does for itself, for its existence, and goes to great lengths to explaining why it certainly is not a cultic movement. But by this very standard, it's proving that it is. It's proving that that's exactly what it performs in, and that's something you say is part of the culture. It's something that people have been taught to do as leaders throughout the entire enterprise.
Yeah, and I would just want to point out too that I think that there's this attitude that these are student ministry problems. There's a lot of focus on, the ministry houses, and I think that that's good and that's appropriate, because those are the highest amount of control that they have. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a lot of abuse when you're literally living with them 7 days a week.
Right.
But I think that there's also this kind of, and I have specifically been told this since I've left by multiple people. Yeah, the student ministry is like that, but the adult ministry isn't like that. And that's just not true. Mm-hmm. The same type of behavior is also happening in the adult groups, where people are encouraged to tell their leaders about how other people are doing in their group. And then it used to be a weekly report or a monthly report. I'm not sure exactly what it is now. But the leaders, the home church leaders in the adult groups, are then taking these with the names of the people that are coming, attendance, and then they're typing up a summary of how they're doing, who's doing what, who's bringing out who's in conflict, whatever their blurb is. And then all of those go to the elders. And the elders review all of this stuff.
Okay.
So this idea that things are happening that the elders aren't aware of, I don't think is true. I think, and I just think that, and if you know that this stuff is happening, it kind of makes you feel a little less comfortable that people aren't sharing information about you. And if you don't know it's happening, you're more likely to be manipulated by the tactics, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, absolutely. Because for every person I've spoken with has made mention of that very fact, is that despite what they say, despite what we were told in our meeting with Kate and Conrad, I'm sorry. These folks who are, I think pretty upper level leaders in Xenos, despite what they claim and despite what they infer, is that there actually is an awful amount of very rigorous, very detailed documentation going on, in which basically Xenos keeps detailed files on any and everything that they find out about people that they feel that they have to keep. In order to get some sort of, let's just say, spiritual authority over them, and enables them to assert it in ways that are just beyond belief. That's what I'm seeing over and over. And you're just confirming it once more. And what can you? There are several different forms that I've seen. There's several I've actually received that people have. I mean, out of the blue, I didn't ask for this stuff, okay? But people just start sending me all this stuff. Copies of it, and I'm just amazed at the amount of micromanagement that Xenos leaders seek to get over the people there.
Yeah, it's very intense. I mean, if you look at in the LTC classes, which once you complete those, you can join the servant team and be what they call a deacon, and there's 600 to 800 deacons in the church. And in that, there's a 38-page document called Personal Discipleship, I believe. And it is just detailed all of these types of questions that you should be asking your the people that you're discipling on a regular basis. If you look at, like, on page 35 of it, there's detailed questions about you should be checking the married people's sex life, including the frequency and the satisfaction. And then over and over in that document, there's many places where they're saying, you need to be encouraging people to join the support team, the fiscal support team. God is your provider. So it's a black and white choice to serve God by giving. You need to probe and ask about their giving. How do you view your retirement? How generously and regularly do you give your money? How much debt do you have? Are you spending money on your wants instead of giving it to the church? I just feel like those are insane things to be asking people regularly, to be micromanaging their finances, and to be telling leaders that this is what they should be asking.
Yeah. And this is something that you began to see, you began becoming privy to these records at what age? I mean, when did you start knowing that this was going on?
Well, I started taking the leadership training classes because you can take them whenever you want. Right. And I started taking them, I would have been 14 or 15 when I started.
Wow.
So I don't know, maybe it was the end of my freshman year that I started in their classes. So once a week I'm taking a night class there. Because my goal at the time was that I would have it. It's a 2-year, it takes 2 years to go through all the classes. And so at the time I was like, well, by the time I turn 18, I'll have all of the classes finished, and then I can be on the servant team, and I was really, just all in. And so that's why I was starting these classes younger than most people would, but,
and so it's perfectly natural for Xenos to then persuade you or just indoctrinate you. You didn't have a choice. That's perfectly fine to have this kind of intrusion into your life. It's perfectly normal.
Yeah, it's normal. It's not only normal, it's expected.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you went along with it, and that's obviously something that this paperwork that you knew was kept and should be kept. So what else? So continue. I'm sorry I've been interrupting you a lot, but you're telling me a little more. What were some of the other things that you saw that this began really, like I said, didn't add up?
I started seeing how the biblical counseling was being run in ways that were really unethical. There was a lot of unethical influence applied in all aspects of someone's life. And there was a lot of coercive control. And you can look on the site and see, Bev DeLashment has a paper where she talks about how you should be communicating, everything that someone's telling you in their counseling sessions to their home church leaders. And that only in some circumstances should that person be made aware that these things are being communicated to their home church leaders.
So your counsel is immediately just something that should be reported, obviously.
Right.
I mean, it's consistent with what you're saying about the paperwork, but now you have Beverly DeLashment, who's obviously a very high level leader in Xenos, telling everybody it's just absolutely vital. It's normal. It's just something matter of fact that you just go ahead and you basically spill trusted confidences with home group leaders that you derive from what, counseling situations as a leader?
Yes.
Man, wow, that's just unreal.
And these policies are also then put out so that people can be lay counselors, because if you're a home church leader, if you're discipling someone, then you should also be able to provide biblical counseling. And so what they have is just they've just created this culture where abuse can be rampant. People don't even mean to necessarily abuse someone, but they're just not qualified to be handling certain issues.
Right.
But the church is telling them that they are. And I think that's why you see a lot of suicides in the church, and you see, when the founding elder of your church is in a teaching going, mocking suicide and saying that it's just attention-seeking behavior, and that if we just ignored these kind of things, that it would go away because people are just looking for attention from leadership. That's really sad to me.
Yeah. That's tragic.
And that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. That's an abomination. That's not even pastoral counsel. That's just some of the most, that's basically shooting the wounded in any case. That's just off. And that was by Dennis McCallum, I understand. That's one of the more infamous things I know he's known of having said, in which he certainly wants to document more later. So if you're saying you had a problem with the biblical counseling part of it being that intrusive, what point did you start struggling with that?
When I'm finding out that people are being hurt by this, that I know, that their information is being shared and they're being re-traumatized by this information, by people knowing this stuff.
Okay.
And then there were other things that I was on the leadership team, and I would, maybe there were things that were being said that I didn't agree with, and I would speak up. And there was one instance that is very vivid in my mind where I was the only one, there's like 35 of us in this room, and I'm the only one who's saying, I don't agree with this decision. I don't understand why we're doing this, because they were closing the CT and you had to be a member of a small group in order to be in this, to come to CT. I don't know. It doesn't really matter what the issue was, but I didn't agree with it. And I was nicely, I wasn't being argumentative, but I was like, I just don't understand why we're doing this. And I was I was being perceived as though I was being a troublemaker.
Yeah.
When it was my understanding that was the point of why we were having these meetings, was to get everybody's input and not for it not to be an echo chamber. But, and so we did this vote, and everybody votes for whatever to pass, and I'm the only one who votes against it. And after this meeting, I had 7 people individually come up to me privately and say, hey, everything you said was right. I totally agree with you. I just it'll paint a target on my back if I speak out. So I'm sorry that I didn't back you up in there. And okay. That was more frustrating to me than anything, that people who are in leadership don't even feel like they can speak their mind, because they're going to get hell for it later. It's going to, you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm clearly stating that, but.
No, you're very clear. I mean, very clear. Yeah. It's definitely quite clear. Yeah. I mean, it's just a point where you can't think for yourself. You can't have honest disagreement. And I think that's the sign of the health of any organization, any church, any cult. It ultimately comes down to how you handle dissent. Well, obviously, if God's speaking at the top and his mouthpieces are all beneath him, and if you're not one of those mouthpieces, then obviously you're wrong. You know, in a cult, there's only one dimension of an argument. You're wrong because there is no argument.
Right.
So.
And they have a policy. Their policy is that if there's a dispute between a leader and someone below them, so if someone who's above me, if I have a dispute with someone who's above me in the leadership, continuum or whatever, that the church will take the leader's side instead of the members.
Really?
So I think that's where you see, I mean, you're going to see it on smaller scales, but then I think that's where you end up seeing these larger, more damaging scales of, like, you had a paid biblical counselor on staff at Xenos and a home church leader who sexually assaulted double digits of women. And the church covered it up and said it was just consensual sexual sin. And I wonder how many times people had complained about this person, who I knew, that were then just told, there wasn't irrefutable proof. Because that is the policy, that there needs to either be irrefutable proof or, that there would be other signs that a leader was, in sin. And if they don't see these other fruits, diseased fruits, then you take the leader's side and the member is wrong.
So, let me see if I understand this correctly. Maybe I misunderstood you, but did you just say that there was a leader in Xenos, a leader, like I said, somebody in charge of a home church, whatever. There was a leader in there that actually was recognized as a leader in leadership, who actually was involved in sexual assaults, sexual improprieties, and he was continually let go. Or did I understand that right?
He was on staff as a biblical counselor at Xenos.
Oh my God.
And he was also leading a home church, and he was a full-grown adult, and these things were happening to, young college kids. So you've got 18, 19, 20. And the church released a statement to the college group email that said, James Rochford was the one who wrote it, and he said that it was sexual sin, I believe are the words he used.
All the way around. So every time he said double digits, let's just say 10, okay, a minimum. So there were 10 incidences in which this man was sexually in impropriety at the very least. I'm talking the very, very, very minimum. He was sexually in sin with 10 individual women, and yet he continued to be in his position, and they knew it.
No, they fired him, but
they didn't fire him.
They did fire him, but they encouraged the girls not to go to the press or the police. And I think, and then the way that they're wording the email is just intentionally deceptive. Let's call it what it was. He was sexually assaulting these girls. He had power over them. There was a power imbalance. There was manipulation. There was coercive control. And I know that people, I don't know with the sexual assaults, but I know that people had issues with his leadership before. And so I really doubt that when this all came out, that this was the first time that they had ever heard something negative about his leadership.
Sure.
And so I think that that's where you see these kind of policies where you're going to back the leader first over a member unless there's irrefutable proof. That's not a safe church.
Yeah, absolutely. Doctrine of a person. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Wow. And this is something that came up while you were you were exploring, in leadership positions. You were there starting to serve as one.
Well, that particular situation happened after, I had physically left.
Okay.
But, I was still connected to the church. So I'll just try to quickly sum up. The reason I started to stop coming, I had been asked to split a home church, to join another home church, to split it. And it was sprung on me. I didn't know that the conversation was about to happen. I had no idea that this is what I was going to be asked to do. And my response was that I wanted to think and pray about it. And the elder son who was in charge of this home group, he flew off the handle and became really enraged and said that as my leader, because he was older than me, that he was telling me that this is what God's will was, and that this is where the church needed me and this is where I should be, and that I needed to just acquiesce to that. And And I was like, you don't get to speak for God. I'm allowed to say that I need some time to think about it and pray about it.
Right.
And he was like, no, we have to make a decision this week. You need to answer me right now. And it turned into a whole thing, but I was like, you don't get to speak for God to me. And he confronted me 4 days later in front of like 30 people, at the CT, and went through the whole thing again. And I just said, you don't speak for God. I don't care that your daddy started the church. You don't get to speak to tell me what God's will is for my life. And I'm allowed to say I want to pray about it. And so because I didn't agree to split that church, then I was told that I wasn't allowed to join another church. So I was kind of floating for a little bit, and I decided I was going to take a step back, and I was just going to CTs, and I was still kind of going to prayer groups, and I was fellowshipping with people, but I wasn't joining the small groups. And as I was able to, instead of 6 out of 7 days I'm doing Xenos stuff, I had more days, and the space started to allow me to kind of start processing things more. Like, the cognitive dissonance started to wane a little bit. And it started to make me question whether I wanted to sit under that leadership. And so I ended up, kind of taking a step back. And I decided that I just kind of wanted to be a normal teenager for a minute. And, cause I was very upset and hurt by the things that had been happening. And I couldn't reconcile it.
Right.
But I had always kind of planned to go back, and get back into a home in a small group and lead. And, but so I started dating this guy who wasn't in the church, but said he was a Christian. And I had been dating him for 8 weeks. And I drank with him this one night, and, he intentionally got me to the drunk, and he was spiking my drinks, and he raped me in the middle of this, party. And I was trying to push him off and tell him no. And there was so much shame from that I didn't recognize that it was, rape, that I recognized it as, this is a consequence of me being in the world, that if I had stayed in Xenos, this wouldn't be happening, because that's how we were taught. And I felt a lot of shame, and I ended up marrying him because for some reason in my head, if I married him, then premarital sex wasn't a sin, or it wasn't as bad, or, because
it was your absolution.
Yeah. And I ended up in this really, abusive marriage that I didn't recognize as abuse, because I had been groomed my whole life to accept that, emotional and psychological and spiritual abuse were acceptable, and that they came with love. And so I'm experiencing all of this stuff in my marriage, and I'm not recognizing it. And I was so I wasn't attending the physical church, but I was still watching or listening to the teachings online. I was still following the doctrine, because I thought that the doctrine sound, I was just hurt by some people who sinned against me, which is always their kind of party line. Yeah. And I still wasn't able to identify all of the broken applications of that theology that negatively were impacting my life. And so I was married to him. It took me a decade of marriage, where I said, until I got myself into counseling, and I said, if I stay in this marriage, I'm going to kill myself. There's no other way out. So I either need to divorce him, which felt like a sin at the time, or I need to kill him, or I'll end up killing myself. And so I decided to pick the option where I would be alive. And then through counseling, Huh?
I'm glad for that. Yeah.
But through counseling, that's when I started to really go through and unpack all of these misapplied and manipulated ways that they teach things.
Mm-hmm. And this is counseling outside the church. Now, you weren't going back to Xenos for this at all. So
no.
So you were still going. Were you still going to church though during all this? And did you ever go and hear their side of things? What they thought about it all? Or did you ever discuss this with them?
Did I?
Did you ever discuss the marital issues that you had during the 10 years with anybody in Xenos?
I did with some former leaders. I did reach out to some people, but I don't know that I articulated that I was being abused because I didn't realize that I was being abused.
I see.
But I did, I was directed to different teachings and things, and there's a teaching that Doug has where she says that your husband knows your body better than you do, and he'll teach you about your body, and that you don't have the right to say yes or no any longer, because your body belongs to God, and to say otherwise is a worldview. And so they were kind of reinforcing this concept that that there isn't really such thing as marital rape unless it's super violent. I mean, to me so I would cry when I was having sex, but it was sinful for me to say no, or that I didn't have bodily autonomy, and those teachings are just really damaging and dangerous. And when I was still in, I took one of the I think it's called Biblical Womanhood, whatever class it is, as part of LTC and all of that. And one of the things that they talk about is that when you're married, you should be, as a woman, you should be sleeping naked so that you're ready whenever your husband wants. You should always be readily available. So those are the types of teachings that were kind of reinforcing the behavior, the abuse that I was enduring. And I know I told part of my story semi-publicly, and I had over a dozen people reach out to me privately and say, I'm not ready to tell my story, but this same thing has happened to me. And it breaks my heart that I know that there are people in the church that are still experiencing this abuse. And I just want them to recognize that their teachings are harmful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because there's such a power in equity, as you've already mentioned. That's one of the things that, when we were talking to Kate, she just, it didn't come out in the discussion we had on the Zoom call, which they just posted all over the universe for anyone to see if we had the right URL on YouTube. Right. But in the emails she sent to me, she expresses this great outrage that we would even infer that such a thing as women being sexually or anyway abused was somehow going on, that what men did was somehow being like just overlooked or given short shrift. But in other words, men could be certainly couldn't be mistreated. Women couldn't be mistreated unfairly like that in Xenos, because certainly as a woman, she said she was outraged to hear that such inequities could be even considered going on. But what you're telling me is just the opposite.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I was in, it was a common practice where if a woman in a ministry house had sex with a man in a ministry house, the woman would be the one who was excommunicated and kicked out, and the man would be provided like support for his lusts.
Yeah.
That's the culture, of the group. So to say otherwise is I just can't imagine that I don't know. I don't know how she can say that. And maybe her experience is a little different because she was the daughter of an elder. So she may have been treated a little differently than the rest of us, but, there's no way that you can not.
I would also think though that she's been privy to a lot more than most people do. And I think, I don't want to mischaracterize, her reaction because I really don't understand it. But, for me, it's just hard for me to believe that she's that ignorant of what's going on in Remnant. I'm talking about Remnant.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can edit this out. I'm just sorry that she would infer that such a thing, could be going on, or such a thing, is an outrage that goes on in a place like Xenos within their groups because she knows. I think she knows more than she really wants to admit. So.
Yeah, and it's about protecting the church over everything.
Right. So God bless you. You endured this decade of chaos, and then you finally started getting counseling that finally helped you understand that what you were doing or what your husband was doing was clearly, abuse and monstrous and a crime. And that you finally began realizing that, you were a person, you mattered, and that you certainly were someone that needs to be, taken care of. You weren't being cherished, you were being exploited, you were being used. So did you end up divorcing this man or what?
Yes.
How is that connected to your leaving the church in any way? Or did you finally, what was the point you finally just decided, things had to change?
Well, once I physically, the last time I was physically in the church was 2007 or 2008, but I still continued to follow their doctrine online and still listen to their teachings. And once I, divorced him and I started to, so like 4 years ago is when I was like, I stopped listening to their teachings and I stopped engaging with that. Because that's when I started to really kind of deconstruct the inaccuracies and the abusive teachings that were being told. Wow. That were kind of ingrained in me. This idea that you're suffering for Christ's sake, is so misapplied in that church. And the reality is that the suffering for Christ's sake means to endure the resistance from the world to the gospel, but it does not mean that an abuse victim is required to tolerate or suffer for evil's sake. And I think that they need to stop lying on God's word about that kind of stuff and misapplying it to silence victims.
Right. So it's been 13, 15 years now. You've been away, physically out, but then just in the last several years, you've started to really kind of look through it. What's your journey been like? Having to look at scripture and look at yourself and look to your relationship with God. What's it been like for you in trying to kind of figure that all out and kind of, take a step back internally and say, okay, what do I really believe? What do I really know? What's that been like for you? It's been hard, and it's been initially it was scary to face that, what you've built your entire world around may not be as solid as you thought it was. And it takes a lot of work to do, and it gives me a lot, but it also gives me a lot of empathy for people that are still in. How it's daunting to start unpacking these things, to start facing these things, to start looking at them critically and eliminating the cognitive dissonance. But it's also
so like free, and the relationships that I have now are so much more fulfilling. And I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of hope and healing, and that there's a lot of good on this side of the bridge.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So there's been a freedom that's come by just stepping back and thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
And picking up that Bible and trying to disassociate the voices you heard. Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with once they leave a movement like Xenos or cult or an abusive church, but they want to retain faith. They definitely want to keep what relationship they believe they have with God intact, and it's so hard because a system like that fragments you so completely that you feel so destroyed, and that, as if everything you've ever believed really is all in question. It's all up to reinterpretation, but that's not always a bad thing. Reinterpreting and re-looking back at what you're doing is always I think a good step of personal development, and I think, as I said, as you've shared, it's so liberating to actually be able to do that on your own terms. I like to say to people as I counsel them, if God is who he says he is, then he can certainly show you what truth is, and that's his job. That's his job. He's able to do that without anyone making you feel a certain way because of some group dynamics you went through.
Right.
And that's just something that I think is part of the process of growing and moving beyond a place like Xenos. So, well, I really appreciate your sharing. I really thank you for being as honest and as just very open with your struggles and with what you've seen. And what I'd like to do is, as we wind up our podcast days, is give you an opportunity to maybe say something that maybe leave a message, maybe send a message to folks that are still there in Xenos who might be listening, and I'm sure we're going to have them. I know that our podcasts, have really jumped up since we've got a lot more engagement that we can tell through our metrics, and primarily from the Columbus, Ohio area. We've had a lot of people, a lot more traffic and people downloading during these podcasts, and so what we try to do. And what I'm trying to do is when I interview people is give them an opportunity to maybe share from their heart, just something they'd like to maybe say back to people who are at Xenos who might be listening, or maybe you have friends, family, or anybody else that you may know that's still be involved. Is there something you'd like them to know, or like to share with them, you'd like to say?
Yeah, so I think that I would just start out, and I want to be really clear that I'm not attacking you guys, that I am speaking because I genuinely care about the people that are in that church, and that I'm crying out for you to kneel with the wounded, and to care about the stories that are being told, to listen to understand instead of listen to argue and defend.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's this kind of idea that we're airing your dirty laundry, and I don't think that's a negative thing. I think that it's time that the church does its laundry, instead of taking the laundry and that's dirty and hiding it in corners and pretending it doesn't exist. And this gangrene is just then taking over. It's time to wash the laundry, do it, air it dry. That's where the healing is going to going to come. And something practical I would love to see from the church is for them to be willing to maybe hire a third party organization to come in and review and interview and look for abuse. I mean, like the Psalm 82 initiative, or whatever, that you would be willing to audit yourself and take practical steps. Stop. You can rebrand your church, but what you don't get to do is rebrand people crying out for accountability and say it's spiritual attack. That's not what this is. Mm-hmm. You're not being attacked by Satan. People are crying out for accountability for the things that they've experienced.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that time. That's a very timely message for us. One of the scriptures, one of the New Testament scriptures say that judgment begins at the house of God. And, judgment is what it is. And that doesn't mean divine, brimstone, fire from out of heaven, 100-pound flaming, hailstones falling from the sky. That's not the judgment that's being referred to. What the scripture's context really means is that judgment, discernment, understanding, weighing the difference between right and wrong, that begins at the house of God. And if the house of God becomes a subject of it, so be it. That's what it has to be. And if we're going to call ourselves a called out community, a koinonia, if we're going to call ourselves a fellowship, a people where people are truly being molded into the image of Christ, and then we have to understand how far that we fall, and that no matter who we are, we're all still in need of a Savior. And seeing this is Holy Week, this seems like an appropriate thought for today. So, man, Jessica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time you spent. I really appreciate your sharing with us today. And thank you once again. We look forward to getting this posted. And I want to thank you once again for just being so honest. I appreciate that. And I'm sure everyone else listening today will certainly draw an awful lot of reflection on what you shared today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today as we explored just where are we going. Our prayer is that you have been encouraged and strengthened, and if necessary, challenged in your daily journey through life. Jesus is coming. You can fall with the night, or you can rise with the sun. The choice is yours. You can email us with questions and comments at feedback@spiritwatch.org. And if you need urgent personal spiritual help, email us at help@spiritwatch.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Please follow our podcasting at our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. This podcast is a production of Spirit Watch Ministries, taking heed that no man deceives you.